Well, welcome back, everybody, and a belated happy St. Patrick's Day to you, Jason, on this Tuesday morning. I wonder, did you get absolutely plastered and blackout drunk and wake up face down in a pool full of your own vomit in a gutter, which is what the whole holiday is about? I think when people try to sum up our legacy as a nation and our contribution to the world, that's probably the first thing they think about now, given the modern incarnation of St. Patrick's Day. Is that how you ended up?
Well, just to say, it's clearly what the World Health Organization thinks of us. I don't know if you saw their post yesterday about how, I can't remember it verbatim, but it was something about how, happy St. Patrick's Day. Think about your relationship with alcohol today. And a lot of people were picking up on this, like, gee, wait to stereotype, guys. But suffice to say, it wasn't applicable to me. It's been many a year since as I said to you on a previous episode, you'd have to drag me into town. Islamic terror threats aside, you would have to drag me into town anyway with the bloody crowds in there. So that wasn't an issue. And it doubly wasn't an issue because I should also update our listeners, many of whom very, very graciously were praying for my family and I over the past couple of weeks. Our little daughter is at home with us. Very happy to say she recovered very well, and she has a lot of follow-ups with specialists and things, unfortunately, but big step in the right direction. So that's all just to say that there was no way in hell I was going to be giving up on valuable sleep over the past couple of days, because my wife and I are now figuring out how to manage two kids. And let me tell you, Ben, because surely you have it coming, it's like an exponential graph. It's like you're getting by, and then it just goes like this when the second one comes in, because it feels like at night when he wakes up when she's sleeping, and then she wakes up when he's sleeping, and so it's just sort of like they're playing musical chairs on some deep subliminal level that we don't have access to.
Well, I've heard that's the case and that it's nightmarish for a little while, but I've also heard from people who have a lot of kids that when you get past about 3, that's when it starts to plateau and doesn't get any harder. It's as hard to manage 3 kids as it is to manage 10 or 15 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm being a bit hyperbolic there, but you know what I mean? That things sort of stabilize and it's as hard as it's going to get after that point. So that's at least encouraging to know that you're not just going to ratchet up your misery for every single installation of your family.
Yeah, and I do feel like, you're already plenty tired and plenty stressed with 2 kids, so you may as well ramp up your potential workforce / army, because I mean the 2 of them together make a pretty miserable gang.
On the St. Patrick's Day point, by the way, I saw we hadn't planned to talk about this or bring this up, but I thought I might throw it at you and just see what you think. That are you familiar with the Belfast music group Kneecap? Those rappers.
Unfortunately, so yeah.
Well, I saw a tweet from them which I thought was interesting, where I think they were quoting somebody else, but they were sort of floating this as an idea to think about, where they were saying, was St. Patrick all that great, given that he brought Christianity to Ireland? And from their perspective, the kneecap guys in the left and, secular people today, militant seculars in Ireland who typically dominate the culture, Christianity was terrible and brought nothing but subjugation and harm to the culture. And they were essentially thinking out loud, saying, was that such a good thing? Would we have been better off with the paganism? And maybe we shouldn't have a national day to this guy because he actually kind of screwed us over for over a millennium and a half now. I clearly do not agree with that on any level, but I was sort of refreshed in a way to hear them thinking like that and talking like that, because I've always thought that should be their position. Like if you hate Christianity and you think Christianity is awful, which I do not, but if they do, then what are we celebrating exactly? You're celebrating the guy who brought this awful, quote unquote, ideology to our shores and made us.
You may as well be honest about it, or you may as well maybe be consistent about it, I suppose. And I agree, it's a lot easier to work with, I suppose, people who are violently opposed to you, because they're doing what they think is right, compared to people who just don't really think about anything, sort of apathetic towards everything. and they don't necessarily hold consistent positions. There's plenty of them around, but I did find that I did see the post you're talking about, and I found it very funny because whatever if you're not a fan of Christianity, but like you're willingly engaging in fantasy if you think that things were paradisal before it came along. I mean, and that was a key element of their post. They were saying something about, I can't remember word for word again because I don't generally memorize X posts, but they were talking about how we're all better off when we were, with the druids dancing under the sun or something like this. And it's like, you'd have been doing that for about 10 minutes before some lad came up behind you and caved your head in with a stone. Like, it would have been, I don't know, bludgeoned you to death with this bronze club.
Yeah, I like the ancient Irish mythology as much as the next person. The Antain and the various sagas that we have are excellent and beautiful. The Ulster cycle, we all love Ferdia, we all love Cuchulainn, but the idea that we were better off when we were running around in the woods painted blue, naked, cutting each other's heads off, and engaging in human sacrifice and the bog bodies and all, the idea that that was superior to cathedrals and monks preserving literature on islands and so on and so forth is a strange perspective to me. I'm not sure what they thought society was like beforehand, but I would invite them to try and live somewhere that is like that today, like perhaps Papua New Guinea, and see how much they enjoy it, because that's pretty much what we were at, as were most people, as was pretty much the entire human race until a couple of thousand years ago.
Well, I do feel like with the centimeter deep understanding a lot of these people have of history, the closest they could get to living in their druidic fantasy would be something like, I don't know if you remember during the Black Lives Matter riots over in the US, you had all those hippies set up their, what was it, their Chaz. It was this autonomous zone in Seattle where they were like attempting to, essentially live in, I don't know, communion with nature or something like this. And they were trying farming. They literally put down cardboard and put like that much soil on top of the cardboard. And then they were really shocked that they couldn't get anything to take root. And I feel like, similar, if you send kneecap off to live in accordance with nature, you'd probably end up with something approximating Chaz.
But I think as well that's very true. But also I think as well, it's so interesting that in order to jettison Christianity, as so many people want to do, up to and including our president, I'm always impressed. I actually get excited for Michael D. Higgins' presidential addresses around Christmas and Easter and St. Patrick's Day, because I always want to see how is he going to try and not talk about Christianity this time. Like, how will he take the most Christian of holidays that entirely revolve around the resurrection of Jesus Christ or the birth of Jesus Christ or whatever it might be, and try to turn it into something about transgender immigrants or climate change or whatever? Like, he'll always find a way to do it, and it's fascinating to watch. But my point is, if you take away Christianity from Irish culture, there is almost nothing left. The people who created this society, the people who fought for our independence and so on, in many ways were fighting for religious freedom. That was a central part of what they were doing. Kevin Barry, the lad of 18 Summers, who we all love, as we showed, he was a hero. Kevin Barry died with rosary beads in his pocket. When he was in the cell, there were Republican women outside praying rosaries for him. And it's not all a Catholic thing. We had so many Protestants, Wolfe Tone, Robert Emmett. These guys were not Catholics, but they were Christians, And so that's not to say you have to be a Christian. That's not to say, that there's no place in Ireland for non-Christians. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, if you don't at least recognize the critical part that Christianity has played in the foundation of this country, you are denying pretty much the whole of Irish history and the country itself. There's nothing left at the end, and what are we even celebrating?
Yeah, no, it's and I mean, you also factor in the fact that a lot of our sense of pre-Christian Ireland is communicated to us by, old Christian Ireland, and that it was a lot of monks doing the transcribing and the transmitting of a lot of the stories that we have today, and that do build our profile of ancient Ireland. So yeah, it's a bit like cutting your legs out from under you, and you, I don't know, engage in sort of posting that Kneecap does, but I should say, as you'll be well aware because we do read our comments, lest we turn off all of those who object to our religious diatribes every week, how about we take aim instead at the modern religion of climatism, which you wrote something very funny about last week.
Yes, yeah. I don't know how many people will have seen this, but I did get a good chuckle out of it. That we're all familiar with the annual COP summit, the conference of parties where the UN has this annual. It's Comic Con where everybody gets together and discuss comic books. It's basically that, but for climate enthusiasts. So all the world leaders fly in to a given city, wherever it might be. It's a different city every year. And they all talk about climate change and how we need to do something about climate change. I don't know why they keep having them, because they know what they need to do and what they want to do. The mission has not changed as far as we need to reduce emissions. I don't agree that with the hysterical objectives that they've set, but from their own perspective, I don't know why they can't just get on with it and why they have to keep having meetings. But I guess that's bureaucrats for you. So anyway, regardless, this year they're meeting in Brazil, and as we all know, Brazil is known for being home to a large part of the Amazon rainforest, and they wanted to make a statement about how beautiful the rainforest is and what a tragedy it would be to lose this wonderful natural amenity that we have as a species. So they had the bright idea of holding it in the rainforest, where all the world leaders who come are going to go in and they're going to see the trees and the nature and the flora and the fauna, and they'll think, oh my gosh, this is gorgeous, and it'll make an impression on them. So when they go back, they have a renewed sense of purpose and motivation. Which sounds like a great idea. I mean, don't you agree, Jason? That sounds like a good plan. On
it
paper.
Sounds like a druidic paradise.
It does indeed. It sounds absolutely spectacular. The shamans were cooking when they came up with that one. The only problem is, because it's in the rainforest, there's no infrastructure. So how are you going to get in all these world leaders to even have the discussion? Where's Emmanuel Macron going to park his car? We have to sort out the logistics here. So they're having to build a road, and part of that road is going to entail cutting down thousands of acres of said rainforest in the process. They've got heavy machinery in there as we speak, mowing down trees for miles and miles into the distance, and many local residents, some of them natives, are complaining that this is damaging their business. They collect berries and things, and many of the berry trees are being cut down, the acai berries and things. So I just find this is the kind of thing that only politicians could come up with, where in order to highlight the plight of nature and the importance of the Amazonian rainforest, we're going to mow it all down and create a highway so that we can talk about preserving the rainforest. What did you think of this story when you first saw it?
Well, I'm in much the same position as you, and it's for our readers to decide, because the way in which I interpret schemes like this is according to that. I've probably brought it up before, but that bell curve meme where you have the very low IQ people and the very high IQ people in agreement, and you've got the vast majority of midwits offering some convoluted explanation. I feel like in relation to this, it's like, I don't know, you and I, and as I say, it's up to our listeners to decide whether we're in the low IQ or high IQ segment, are like cutting trees is bad, and then you have these politicians, their supporters, who are like, we're cutting down vast swathes of the Amazon rainforest for sustainable purposes. And, everyone's like, brilliant, environment saved. So suffice to say, I think it's absolutely stupid. And I feel like it's a sort of, when I heard the story initially, the first thing that came to mind was, this is exactly the sort of thing that historians of the future will find. I always feel like in the future, some sort of profession will be digital archaeologist, where they literally go back through the internet and just trawl through all of the stuff that we had on here. I don't know how they would get access to it, but I feel like it'd be a cool premise for a story or something. But anyway, they come across this story, or direct evidence of this having taken place, and I don't know, you just think, like, these people clearly lost their minds. How did they decide that cutting down concrete trees was in service of this thing they started talking about, the environment. And I feel like so many, modern climate initiatives are in the same spirit where again, I'm no scientist in this area, nor are you, but there's just something in me that when, you drive past a field, as you say do in America or continental Europe or something like this, and there are just miles, it seems, of solar panels covering grass and covering these beautiful fields, and you're like, how can this possibly be in service of nature? It's like, okay, it's giving us energy, but I mean, a cynic might say it's only giving us energy to fuel the sort of destructive lifestyles that we potentially do lead. Because, I know people might, slam me as a lefty or a progressive here, but I actually think that, respecting nature, respecting creation as we'd see it, is an inherently conservative position, is a common sense position. I actually agree, people who I politically intensely disagree with in Ireland, I actually really admire some of the sort of rewilding and, nature restoration work that they're doing. Obviously, the difficulty comes in terms of how you think it's best to go about this. And, you've got these stupid Amazon initiatives and, say, fields and fields of solar panels. And then, I think John has written about previously, wind turbines that kill protected birds and things like this. So suffice to say, I think that looking out for the natural world is a very worthwhile cause, but so much of this stuff naturally rubs up so many of us as being counterproductive at the very least.
Yeah, to be honest with the rewilding stuff, I would be happy to see the rewilding that appears to be going on the front grounds of Trinity to continue. I'd love to see that whole place overrun and look like a zombie apocalypse where there's just vines up and down the front. It's like the opening of I Am Legend.
Ideally trapping all of the lecturers and students in there as well.
But
they're gonna be eaten by a giant bumblebee or something.
I do have to wonder about tourists who come to see the great Trinity College and they go, here, Ireland, what's going on, big guy? What is...
Well, I really should clarify this here. I'm not talking about like rewilding in terms of like Dublin City Council deciding we're just going to stop trimming verges and things, because they started doing that during the pandemic, and I'm convinced they just did it out of laziness. They were like, we have so many COVID posters to be putting up. We don't have the manpower to be cutting this grass. So they were like, okay, it's rewilding. I'm talking more so like, there was that guy who, I think politics are absolutely, horrendous and inconsistent. I think Owen Dalton down in Kerry, who's doing a lot to sort of bring back in native Irish species to the patch of land that he's looking over. And I think that that's sort of, thoroughly worthwhile stuff. But, it would behoove him to maybe read Gript from time to time on other things.
I think as well, with the COP summit, which has been criticized for many years over this sort of thing, has seen, for example, last year and the year before, actually, I pulled up some figures for the purposes of this conversation, that in the 2021 summit, they had about 400 private jets land, which emitted over 1,000 tons of CO2 during that one conference. So this is all the various leaders, the different chancellors and prime ministers and presidents flying down to talk about how important it is to protect the planet. And they're all coming in their private jets. We also had a similar number for the one, the Sharm el Sheikh in 2022.
Oh, yeah.
So what I don't understand is, and of course we all remember Eamon Ryan was famous for this, taking his business class flights here, there, and everywhere. And when he was asked about it, like, how can you justify this? Is this not outrageously hypocritical? He effectively said, look, I'm doing important work for the country, okay? Like the meetings I'm going into are having a big picture impact. And he kept saying, we're not going to get anywhere if you point the finger at this person or that person. Or he says, I've never been about like individual judgment. It's more about like what we're going to do at a massive society-wide level. And there's an element of sense to that. I'm not discounting that perspective out of hand or saying, he's just a hypocrite. Like, I understand what he's saying, but I also think, and by the way, I'm not a climate alarmist. You should, I think people know by now, and if you're new to this podcast and you're not familiar with our perspective, I don't agree with Eamon Ryan and the Green types, nor does Jason. we're coming at this from a critical perspective. But I'm saying if you did agree with Eamon Ryan, if you did agree with the people at the COP summit, and you were one of them, would you not say society is made up of many individuals making individual choices? So it's impossible to separate yourself and your own actions from what is happening at the macro level. Where if we're going to make a change, every individual is going to have to make a change. But they never apply it to themselves. It's always, rules for thee and not for me.
Yeah.
Like we lived through COVID-19 where you people forced us for years to engage in telecommunications and everything was done over Zoom. It was a big pain in the ass, but we had to do it for the greater good. And, there's a pandemic, don't you know, and it's killing zillions and trillions of people. So we better do it. You imposed that on us. Why can you guys not have a virtual conference? Why do you have to be flying all over the place, cutting down entire biomes in order to have your little meetings where you sit around pontificating and patting each other on the back about how much you love Greta Thunberg? Like,
yeah, well, like we've spoken on here before as well about the sort of PR problem that a lot of movements face, and I think this is really pertinent here because you've got on the one hand the absolutely alarmist tones in which a lot of these things are written and expressed. And you feel like if the people expressing these things were genuine, they would feel like, okay, we have to do literally everything we can to stop this. So that's like, yeah, stop taking private jets. As important as you think this conference might be, do it over Zoom. It's for the good of averting this. Like, I feel like if an asteroid were going to hit Earth, you were genuine and you were able to take individual measures to stop it, you would 100% be doing what you could to avert that. But you would be doing reaching for everything you could in order to stop this. I mean, like bloody Taylor Swift would be grounded. And you see those gifs of her flights during her tours, and it's just like she flies to get her hair cut and things like this. It's just an unbelievable amount of flying she does. But I just to bring this back to why it's relevant.
Imagine as it that she takes a flight from one end of her jet to the other just to get the bathroom.
Yeah. She's got tons of things plugged in the plane while she's doing that just to maximize.
She's hanging off a drone, like the undercarriage of it, and carry her from one part of her house to the other.
But but suffice to say that there's this massive credibility. I suppose maybe I'll put it that way: credibility crisis for the climate communicators, which is that they. Not only what they say, but the tone in which they say it is consistently undermined by the actions of, the people saying these things. So, yeah, and I feel like this plays into the same thing with the Amazon rainforest. It's like, your average person sees this, and I think we probably fall into the average person category, and you think, like, it's a really hard sell to convince anyone that cutting down rainforest, and not only that, but, like, paving it over with concrete is good for the environment. It's like, I don't know. Like, I find it nearly as easy to believe that the sky is orange actually, and I've been seeing it wrong my entire life.
The next time I'm using a straw at Burger King that's made of paper and it's disintegrating in my mouth, I'm gonna remember this, and it's gonna drive me this close to homicide right then and there. Like, so that's the world in which they're creating, where you're sitting there shivering in your house because you're terrified of putting the heating on for more than a few minutes because of the cost. And they're just they're probably going to drop napalm on the rainforest for a light show to entertain the Saudi sheikh or something like that.
Yeah.
The king of this emirate in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula is going to need to have like a load of elephants slaughtered for his own amusement. And
so there'll be like the screams of the animals please the nature gods, and they'll all be there clapping.
Yeah, to display the native people's culture before they were horribly colonized. So, speaking of things that are optically problematic, there's been a big buzz on social media, as I'm sure you've seen, where Donald Trump made a very controversial decision to invite a rather problematic guest to the White House, if you put it that way. Somebody who has a bit of a mixed reputation, if you want to put it that way. And that was, of course, Micheál Martin, when he invited him over for the St. Patrick's Day diplomacy. And then there was also Conor McGregor. And I suppose we'll talk about both of those and the implications therein. But do we want to do it in chronological order or
I suppose it
reverse
probably
order?
makes best sense. Yeah, and it's yeah, unfortunate that we're obviously recording it so far after Mihal's visit. Um, but the funny thing, I suppose, is that it's impossible to interpret. I don't know about you, but it seems to me it's impossible to interpret the Taoiseach's visit to the White House now separate from the fact that Conor McGregor was clearly invited. Because I obviously have no idea in terms of the planning of inviting Conor McGregor, but it seems to me that must have been organised before the Taoiseach came. I mean, it would have been a lot to put together. I mean, I know it could be done in a couple of days, but it just seems to me that it was more than spontaneous. And it really casts everything in a different light, because obviously we were hearing all about the Taoiseach's deft diplomacy and the way in which he handled the White House and Trump. And indeed, to be fair, in the videos, it seemed as though they got on reasonably well. I mean, Trump was a gracious host, and himself and the Taoiseach exchanged stories about Ireland, and Trump was expressing his admiration of Ireland. And indeed, even when the Taoiseach was visiting JD Vance, it was all very amicable. Now, there were one or two notes of discontent in there. I mean, Trump was talking about... he was sort of saying it in a slightly sort of tongue-in-cheek, begrudging way about sort of, the business that Ireland has swooped out from under them, and about how, they've been sort of intending to get that back as best they can. But it was all, fairly convivial and done in a decent spirit. But I don't know how it's possible to interpret things differently now in light of Conor McGregor's visit, because Micheál Martin's obviously the Taoiseach of Ireland, and then a couple of days later you've Conor McGregor come into the White House, who is directly criticising Ireland's track record under Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And obviously it's not like he just, made his own way to the podium. He was invited there, either presumably directly by Trump or by Musk, because obviously Conor McGregor uses X fairly prolifically, and, Musk is right there in the White House alongside Trump. So I really don't know what to make of what's going on in the White House in terms of their messaging. It's like they engage in standard diplomacy on the one hand with the Taoiseach, and then completely, to use the term, like asymmetric diplomacy on the other hand, having Conor McGregor come and speak from the podium. So it's a super difficult thing to analyze from both from the perspective of what the long-term effects are going to be, but also in terms of what all the intentions are in the middle of this. I mean, maybe you have some more concrete insight than I do.
I just kind of regret, from an entertainment value perspective, that while Micheál was there, he didn't bring out McGregor and Enoch Burke in a sort of a WWE-esque fashion, just have them, or Jeremy Kyle or something, just have them come in from the...
Yeah, he's just sitting there and all of a sudden there's a hand on each shoulder and it's McGregor and Burke, and then, I don't know, they do a Stone Cold Stunner or something.
Yeah, that would have been, we can live in hope for... There's always next year, I guess. But no, on a serious note, though, I think I thought the Taoiseach's praise that he received for his diplomatic nous was a little bit overblown. I mean, he definitely didn't make any critical mistakes. He didn't do anything objectionable then and there in the office that would set Trump off. But overall, I thought the fact that it went well had a lot more to do with Trump pulling his punches than it did to do with Micheál being some kind of
definitely
genius. And so, yeah, I don't know that he deserves as much praise. He doesn't deserve condemnation or criticism, but I think a lot of the media outlets after the fact were kind of talking about this is politics done to a professional level, and aren't we looking
diplomatic masterclass?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure I buy that element of it. And then I think you're right to say that there's a bit of a disparity in having McGregor, and of course, the other thing is, a lot of people, I'm sure there are people watching this who are big fans of Conor McGregor. There are people who would be very critical of Conor McGregor, particularly given his recent legal controversies, and he is a very polarizing figure in that sense. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily the motivation of Irish politicians, but I feel like he is more popular in America than he would be here. Even if you're a fan of Conor McGregor, you would probably have to recognize that the controversies do catch up with you at a certain point when you go through many PR difficulties like he has recently. And I think that the average Irish person would have a lower opinion of him than the average person in the US. But with that said, I think one of the reasons a lot of Irish politicians are concerned about his speech and the comments he made is that it could change the perception of Ireland in America, if you know what I mean. That people over there who weren't aware that, because most people will have seen it, so we don't really need to recap. But for those who might have missed it, he effectively said that the country is overrun with illegal immigration, that Ireland is losing its sense of Irishness because of mass migration, and that the government are allowing the country to be run roughshod over due to de facto open borders and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of truth to that. You know, it's I think a lot of people watching this podcast would agree with that. So, yeah, I think the concern that Irish politicians are going to have is not that he's going to become an Irish Trump who suddenly has a major impact on domestic politics here. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. I think it's more that people stateside will say, oh, Jenny Mac, I didn't know any of that was happening in Ireland, and what is this? And they'll listen to Conor because he's an international sports star, and then it will change how we're viewed internationally. I would believe that's official Ireland's major concern.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. But I also think it's really Ireland-America relations at the moment are super interesting, where it seems to me like there's a fundamental just misunderstanding is kind of the wrong word, but we just don't get each other. Like, I feel as though social media clout, maybe it's because, and you know, I hope our listeners don't get me wrong here, but I do feel as though Americans, compared to every nation, are particularly proactive and sort of organized, and especially so when it comes to politics, such that movements on social media seem to gain ground in reality. And it doesn't quite operate the same way in Ireland for whatever reason. I haven't figured that one out yet. But so as a result, they feel like they can kind of play the same game in America as they do in Ireland. So obviously, I think a lot of the people in the White House would be sympathetic to what Conor McGregor has to say. And indeed, I think there's multiple factors in this. You know, it can't be separated that Trump is a massive MMA fan. I mean, I think he even mentioned Conor McGregor to the Taoiseach when he was over, saying that he's a great fighter. So no doubt, you know, Trump had some interest in having Conor in. But then also Elon Musk, you know, being the man behind X, Conor being a big personality on X, you know, who knows? Maybe they've been in touch. Maybe they organized this. I've no idea. But suffice to say, I think X, as we kind of spoke about last week, I think X is not a good place for getting a beat of the public temperature in Ireland. I think, I don't know, maybe it's better in America. And I mean, you know, X was very sort of pro-Trump ahead of the last presidential election. And then sure enough, Trump won in a, you know, relative landslide. But it for whatever reason, it doesn't really work that way in Ireland. And so, like, a couple of things that I would say to, you know, the American administration is that, number one, just practicalities. As you mentioned on a previous podcast, Conor McGregor would have a very difficult time, if not impossible, getting on the ballot for the presidency over here, because you obviously need signatures of 20 members of the Oireachtas or 4 local authority sort of endorsements, essentially. And I maybe it can be done, but I don't see how that happens. Similarly, then, I don't know if Americans are fully aware of how little executive power an Irish president has. I mean, all he can really do is, you know, beat a drum, but even then, that's subject to the government's approval and things like this. And, you know, Michael D. Higgins is allowed to say what he says because it's largely in line with what the government has to say, if not slightly more, you know, flowery. So there's a real disconnect because, as I say, the reception to McGregor's appearance in the White House over here has been nothing short of a circling of the wagons, and seeing the reaction to it reminded me of what we were talking about, I think, last week, about how I think if Trump had berated Micheál Martin, it would have actually been counterproductive in domestic politics, because if we see it in other countries, European countries, Canada, are all sort of starting to define themselves in opposition to Trump rather than getting into line with, say, him. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening here, such that, like, yeah, Conor McGregor appears on the podium in the White House. Americans are like, wow, this is fascinating. And I think Conor McGregor was sort of clever in how he pitched it. He was saying that, there'd be no Ireland for you guys to go back to. So I think that'll really capture American attention. But in terms of how that translates into domestic politics, I think it's just made sort of, a figure like Conor McGregor and everyone who might be a fan of his into more of a pariah than they already were in Irish political circles. So it's a very complex development. And suffice to say, I would actually see it as making things harder for any sort of opposition to Ireland's current immigration scheme. To sort of gain any political ground, to put it that way. And another thought that I would just like to add on to the end of that as well is that, any political alternative, it seems to me, that wants to gain ground in Ireland would do very well. And again, I'm no political expert or anything like this, but it seems to me that this is true. Any sort of political alternative that would like to get off the ground in Ireland would do well to remember local. Because even though, we say we have general election, a national election, that's worked out on a local level. And we were asked a question in a previous episode, and I actually didn't make this point, which I was kicking myself about how these incredibly, nationally unpopular ministers, Helen McEntee being an example, not only got her seat back, but topped her poll. How can that be? And it's because the people in her constituency are voting for her. I think John in his various writings around the time is correct to point out that people love having a minister in their own constituency, and if you're very good at responding directly to your constituents and getting things sorted out for them, you're going to be returned your seat. And so I think posturing on sort of ideological positions, it doesn't work in Ireland in the same way that it does for a presidential election in the United States, for example. We have a different political system. And so I think that for any sort of alternative success in Ireland, you kind of have to do what, not to kiss their ass or anything, but you kind of have to do what Aontú are doing, which is that taking the broad picture, multiple issue approach, as I say, that Aontú is doing. They are trying to position themselves as a political party like all of the others, but also taking a different line on these core issues. I think, as sort of, understandably passionate as so many people feel about immigration, it's going to be very hard to get sufficient. And again, like a lot of the polling that we have show that a vast majority of the country are concerned about this. But I think they're concerned about this and a bunch of other things, and they're not just going to vote on immigration.
That's something that I think I believe it was Connor Fitzgerald on Twitter. I could be mistaken. It might have been somebody else, but I think he said something to the effect of, if you want to affect change in Irish politics, what you have to do is frame your change that you're proposing in the most boring possible way, where it almost seems like you're not doing anything at all. Like, make it so bland and banal that you're like, yeah, this is totally normal. Loads of countries do this all the time. We used to do it up until very recently. It was proposed by another government, and it's only a slight deviation from what we're currently doing. We just need to make a little tweak here or there. And instead of going for the beating your chest and jumping up and down, and we're going to, change everything, or we're going to flip the table and go mental, that scares people. People don't like that, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on. That's why the teeny tiny fringe of people before profit has never gotten above 2% of the vote in any given national election, despite the fact that they've existed for 20 years, because people have no time for that madness. And people had no time for Sinn Féin while Sinn Féin was like that. And then you notice Sinn Féin becoming more and more boring and banal in their presentation. And they started to do better and better. And now they're the biggest opposition party in the state, now that they're very kind of like ordinary. Now, whether they are ordinary or not is a whole other, you can disagree with that.
Yeah.
Well, they've got an agenda under there. That's a matter of personal opinion. But I'm just saying, as far as the way they present themselves, they come across just like a bunch of lads with boring policies about boring topics that aren't there to go mad and blow things up, literally or figuratively. And so that's when they started doing well. So if you're trying to be the right-wing version of PvP, where you're jumping up and down screaming about revolution and we're gonna do crazy stuff, or we're gonna, like, even if what you're saying is correct, that presentation is terrifying to the
And
vast ordinary of.
sorry to interrupt, but I feel like a lot of people really just don't like to hear this. And when you do make this point, they get annoyed at you, for sort of being the reason that things don't succeed. And it's like you're just at war with reality at this point. It's like there is the way I was thinking about it recently is there's lots of evidence of massive dissatisfaction in Ireland. A ton of evidence. I mean, after, I can't remember whether it was the local or general election, Matt Tracy did a great breakdown of how a really high percentage of the vote actually went to, and a greater proportion of the vote than previously went to sort of a more diverse array of parties, and sort of, parties that you might sort of, consider as being on the right or something like this. But it's really dissipated because it's more so an expression of dissatisfaction than any particular belief in this party or this party or this party. And so I really do feel like, similarly, a friend told me about this saying in Japan about how they have a very sort of, homogenous society and sort of tight knit, and they have this saying about how they beat the nail that sticks out. And I feel like we're a little similar in that sense, in that we kind of do want our politics to be kind of bland and banal, and any sort of firebrand or would-be revolutionary leader is always, they're not going to have popular support. I mean, we nearly forget, obviously the Easter Rising has such a massive place in Irish mythology and Irish history now. That was like a very, very, very minority thing at the time. Like there, in the grand scheme of things, only a handful of people involved. So I mean,
even within the revolutionary movement, it was a minority. There were people who were saying, in principle, yes, we should rebel against Britain, and this was a subset even of those guys, where many of their fellow revolutionaries weren't on board with that. And that's not me criticizing the 1916 Rising. God bless everyone involved in it, and we wouldn't have the country we have without it. So I'm not critiquing them.
Yeah, and I mean,
yeah,
someone might take my saying that as obviously, but look at the change they affected, so like we should continue on down the same path. But I think that the issues they were facing versus the issues we're facing, I mean, are very different, and the context is very different, and the whole sort of situation, you only have to read sort of the history of the time versus the situation we find ourselves in now to see that. I just can't get away from the sort of sense that it would be more fruitful to develop a sort of common sense is just the kind of way to put it, alternative that does many things well for the people who are going to be voting for them. And I can't get away from the idea that we just don't have that currently. So it's like there is a sense in which, an alternative hasn't really been tried yet, in a sense.
Yeah, I would agree. Like not everybody wants to jump right to the flashy policies of, oh, we're going to have mass deportations of illegals, and if people aren't, we're going to build a massive prison, and we're going to chuck tens of thousands of criminals in there, and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm not saying in principle there's anything wrong with those ideas, but I'm just saying day-to-day politics is about a lot of boring, dull crap that's not as grandiose as that. It's like, what are you going to do about local property tax? What are you going to do about the roads that have potholes in them?
It's literally what are you going to do about this bus route that closed down but that a bunch of people relied on? Like, it's things like this.
Rural, I'm living rurally now, as of the last couple of weeks, and I'm noting, which we all know this already, but it's not until you actually live in a rural setting that you realize how inconvenient it is, the lack of public transport infrastructure, that kind of thing that affects people. If you're running a country, you have to think about those things too. It's not enough to just say, we're going to deport a few thousand people, and then we're going to put a load of criminals into a massive super prison, and then we're just going to sit with our thumb up our ass. Like, that's not a platform, I think that's very true, and under discussed, because otherwise, if you're just ranting and raving about a couple of big policies, those aren't the kinds of parties that get elected on the left or the right, and I think that's true in most countries, not just Ireland. I think when you look across Europe and America, those sorts of parties don't typically go very far.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the internet is great for stoking passions. Um, but a lot of people don't vote based on kind of passions. They vote, as I think we spoke about previously, based on sort of the price of different things. And, you might realistically say that, well, immigration is pushing the price of housing up in some sort of obvious sense. But it's basic things like the cost of essentials, as I say, services, all of these different things. So there's just some sort of cold hard reality that has to be dealt with. But this is a hell of a tangent we've gone on from the Oval Office. I feel like if we were to depict this as a walk, if we started in the Oval Office, we're probably roughly down at the Amazon rainforest redevelopment at this stage.
well, if we want to bring it back to the White House, one way we could do that is by talking about some of the substance of what McGregor said regarding mass immigration and the story which came to light at the end of last week about Mr. Randy Gladstone from Guyana. And this story has made much there's been much made of this, and rightly so, given that it is an outrageous story that a 41-year-old man, originally from Guyana in South America, was just convicted of raping and sexually assaulting and falsely imprisoning an 18-year-old girl within days of arriving in Ireland. He had just gotten to the country and he already had committed such a heinous crime. And in addition to that, he had many previous convictions. He had 19 prior convictions in the UK, including for rape, kidnapping, robbery, and false imprisonment. So it's not even like you could say, oh, well, how were we to know what kind of a person he was? He just showed up and then suddenly he started doing mad stuff. What's that to do with us? He had a record of behaving like this in our next jurisdiction, immediately next door to us. And then he came here and he did the exact same thing within a matter of days. How could you?
Yeah, where do you even begin with this one?
What are we doing here? Like, what is actually wrong with this country and the people who run it? Think about all of the vetting we're told is done. Every time you talk about unvetted males, if this topic comes up, and I'm not saying this guy was an asylum seeker, but I'm just saying when you use that phrase, people go berserk and go, what do you mean? There's rigorous vetting. We vet everybody who comes into the country, and even the Gardaí were rushing to, quote unquote, fact check this. And meanwhile, we have people like this running around, behaving in this way. Thanks be to God, he was given a 10-year prison sentence, and the judge said that there's no reason to suspend any part of it because of the profound impact that this had on the victim.
Well, just to interject, absolutely, there was no reason to suspend any portion of that sentence, but I wish judges would say that a little more often about some of the bloody heinous things we see in the courts.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like for once, this is the sort of sentence that you go, yeah, that sounds about right, which is rare in this country. It's almost never that I see an abominable crime committed and then I read about the sentence and it's the kind of sentence that sounds intuitively right to me as a non-legal person. I think that the law, I know that the law is complicated. I know that there's mitigating factors. I know that there's centuries of jurisprudence that go into how we come to the sentencing systems that we come up with, and that's all fine, and that's why people go to law school and study it for years, and there's some of the most well-educated people in our society, and most of us are not lawyers and judges. I get that, but I still feel like the law is ultimately about common sense in a lot of ways, and that the ordinary person on the street who has no legal training should not continually and constantly be shocked and appalled by the sentences they hear. And so this is one of those cases where, thank God, you hear it and you go, yeah, that sounds about right to me. Some people might say we are getting into capital punishment territory. That's a matter of personal opinion, but of course, that's not the kind of system we have in Ireland. So in the context in which we live, 10 years in prison sounds about right to me.
Yeah, not to make light of this at all because it was an absolutely horrendous crime, but when I saw this initially, I was like, if you had some sort of diabolical character generator where you were like trying to come up with someone who should raise red flags at the border, you'd have someone, who's sort of symbolically called Randy Gladstone, who has, say, sort of previous convictions in the next closest jurisdiction. Like, what? Like, as I said a few minutes ago, where do you even begin with this one? It's like every red flag that could have been raised was raised with this guy, and yet he still came in. And then he goes ahead and does the thing that everyone's afraid of. Like, as I say, I feel like if you had some sort of generator, even those ardent critic of Ireland's immigration system would struggle to, come up with a character like this and not strain credulity. Or if you did come up with someone like this, you'd be accused of, like, I don't know, caricaturing and stereotyping. And yet here we have it. He did it, and, I do kind of despair talking about these things because it's kind of like, yeah, if we can't get this right, if on the back of something like that, a minister doesn't sit down and say, like, this can't happen again. This is like, as I've said so many times on this podcast, unfortunately, a failing of the system on multiple levels. Unfortunately, it's only a matter of time until it does happen again.
Because this guy tried to escape after he realized, oh man, I'm in trouble here. Because he basically, again, for many people will be familiar with the story, but for those who aren't, there was at a holiday resort in Dublin. He was there. There was an 18-year-old girl. He invited her into the room. He kind of said, like, come in here for a second. She came in, and then he basically started to sexually assault her. She said, no, I don't want this. She kept saying no, and he forced herself anyway. He forced himself on her anyway. And at that point, she was traumatized. She's been having nightmares ever since, and so on. So
as you would,
horrifying thing to happen to anybody, particularly a young girl. So she ran to her parents. She told them what happened. So he then fled. He realized that this was going horribly wrong for him. And he tried to get a ferry to the UK, and he was denied at the ferry because he was barred from entering the UK because he had committed previous offenses of this sort in that country. So the point is, he was on record as a dodgy guy in Britain who should not be allowed in. They had a picture of this guy's face essentially saying, do not let this man enter the country. He's bad news. But for all our talk of cross-border cooperation and doing our due diligence, like, why is it that our leaders are so big on globalism and globalization in every way? You're always talking about international cooperation, and we need to liaise with our international partners, and that's why we need to do things collectively as Europeans. And I know Britain's out of the European Union now, but still, it's more this kind of like international community that they love to be a part of. Yet when it comes to areas that count like this, where you would actually want some cooperation and you would want the authorities in both jurisdictions to share their homework and say, here, by the way, keep an eye out for this lad. We've determined him to be a problem. They can't do the basic job of just checking that to make sure we're not letting in rapists who molest young girls within days of arriving in our country, having already done it and proven themselves to be that kind of person just next door. It's just shocking and appalling. And how this is defensible to our leaders, how we think we don't need a massive legislative overhaul or an enforcement of the current rules or something is just shocking. Because they are, well, we all know what Irish politicians are like. They're going to sit there. They're going to, if they're forced to comment on it, they won't comment on it unless forced. But if they're forced to comment on it by somebody like me or another journalist asking them directly, they'll say, oh, this is terrible. This is shocking. We feel for the girl, and it's good that justice was served. And then they're just going to proceed as usual. And then the next Randy Gladstone will do his thing in another 6 months or less. This is the way this happened now, is ignore it as much as possible. And if you're forced to comment on it, then just give it lip service and do nothing. and we just continue to the next disaster.
No, you're absolutely right. Even listening to it, you get annoyed, as people understandably do. I don't really have anything more edifying to add to it. It seems to me it might be good to move on to our question today.
Yeah, hopefully I won't explode into a ball of rage at the question. They're a little bit more tame. Hopefully we can have a bit of a palate cleanse after that immensely frustrating piece of news. So here we have a 2-in-1 question from Matt, who says, "Hi guys, I'm a fan of yours and I appreciate what you do. Thank you very much, Matt. I will try to sneak in 2 questions into the one submission. One,
We'll allow it.
Yeah, we'll allow it, absolutely, because they're good questions.
Our borders are just as porous as Ireland's.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no security here whatsoever. But one, what is the most likely alternative line of work you would have pursued if you weren't journalists? That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Jason, you can tell them about how the male stripper thing fell through.
Well, yeah. What would have worked? I mean, I tried it and it just didn't work. It's like no one was turning up to my shows. It's like, yeah, sort of like a completely average shape man of 5'7" stature doesn't look great on posters. So yeah, it wasn't to be. But no, in all seriousness, yeah, it's a funny one. I feel like because my coming into journalism came by an unusual path, in that I got chatting to because I worked with the Irish Catholic before this, and I got chatting with someone there. I didn't apply for them initially, but I got chatting with someone who worked there, and ended up saying that I would be interested in doing a bit of that work. So it kind of came out of the blue a little bit for me. And before that, what I'd been thinking, and which I still think I could have done, would be a teacher. I wasn't looking to set the world on fire or anything like this. I've been more than happy to do my little 9 to 5, and obviously not. I'm sure the teaching job extends beyond that in some regard, but particularly I studied English at university, so at risk of outraging the nationalists and the Gaelgori among us, I think I might have been pretty happy to be an English teacher at school or something like this, but yeah, it clearly wasn't to be.
Yeah, I guess it kind of dovetails a little bit. You see the it comes from the same gene pool. I think you're still
absolutely.
Yeah. I was.
How about yourself?
I was before doing this. I kind of fell into this accidentally because I was planning on at college. I was studying digital forensics and cybersecurity, and I wanted to go into some kind of like counterterrorism work. I thought that'd be cool. As a young man, either police work or Irish Defence Forces. I hadn't really decided what, and I thought that'd be kind of action-packed and fun, because I graduated from secondary school. I was 18 in 2016, so this would have been around the time, in and around that period where there were a lot of terrorist attacks happening in Europe, like the Nice truck attack and the Paris attack.
Oh, yeah.
That really affected me, even though I have no connection to it whatsoever. I was just shocked by it. I think a lot of people were, but I think it affected me profoundly for reasons which I haven't analysed why did that have a big impact.
Contrary to calling the truck drivers radicalised, because of your passionate reaction to it, Ben, you'd have been considered a radicalised young man.
Well, yeah, possibly, yeah, in the opposite direction. And that, because what I kept thinking about was, it wasn't just the amount of people killed. Like, a load of people were killed.
It was horrendous, yeah, a huge one.
When you look at the injury figures as well, the injury figures are shocking. Like, I think almost in the Paris attacks, almost 500 people were killed and injured, because we often discount the injuries because obviously they're more significant, but you forget injuries are people getting their hands blown off, people getting blinded, people getting paralyzed, people, having to walk with a cane for the rest of their life. Like, getting shot with a high caliber rifle, and even if you survive, will affect you for the rest of your life. Like, and then that's beyond the unquantifiable psychological trauma. Even if you're untouched, seeing somebody's head get blown off or losing a loved one or whatever, like, it was just unbelievable. And this was happening a lot around my kind of like 17, 18-year-old period of my life. So yeah, I really wanted to go down that route. And then Tim Jackson, who used to be the main video guy at Gript when I wasn't there when Gript first started. It was doing its own thing. I was on my own path. And then he was going away on his honeymoon for a couple of months. So they were going to be down a video guy. So they needed somebody to fill in temporarily. So they said, here, would you do it? And I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like a fun little gig. So I had no intentions of being like a Gript guy and a journalist. I was just literally filling in for a couple of months and then I was going to go off. And I ended up, they kept me on. They liked what I was doing and I kept going and going. And now I'm like 5 years into it. And it wasn't until a few years in that I realized, I was like, wait a minute, this is my career now. Like I hadn't even thought of myself as a journalist in a sense, but I guess now I'm kind of committed to it and I'm here to stay. So yeah, that's how that panned out. But yeah.
Well, of course, here we're neglecting the fact you're conveniently airbrushing out in a manner similar to Stalin your political aspirations.
Well, that also was a factor. But again, I think I don't know why people are surprised by that. I know you're not bringing it up as a critique, but like I've never concealed the fact that I have strong feelings about political issues. So why would you not want to try and influence things if you think society's going in the wrong direction and you're very open and forthcoming about that? I think it's only a problem. Like I'm a journalist / commentator. I think it's only a problem if you're acting like you're this totally impartial Reuters guy, and actually you're you know what I mean. Like there's nothing secretive about like my perspective, and I'm quite forgiving with it. So I don't.
And we're all human. You have to be able to suspend that in order to, in your position, deal courteously with the people that you have to deal with in your day. But that's what it is. But people, when they hear Ben Stalin, they know what you're about. And I think a lot of people would take that every day, as you say, over someone who, claims to be impartial, but, I don't know, in their newsroom or elsewhere, bitching about this or that person.
Yeah, totally. So for the next one, I'm wondering what you think of this. What is your favorite book and movie?
Yeah, when we were picking the question beforehand, and I'm sure just to assuage other people as well, we'll probably do at some point another sort of questions episode, because we really would like to get to everyone's question who gets into us. But thanks be to God, we do have quite a few coming in. So yeah, just to add that in before I proceeded. But yeah, it really would depend on which day you ask me. I mean, yeah, in terms of which book, like
the Bible.
The Bible aside. Well, my answer for kind of no less religious. A book that very few people know, and I'm not sort of putting myself up on a high horse here, because it was my wife, then girlfriend, who made me aware of it. That had an absolutely huge effect on me after I read it. So I suppose to speak more about influential things on me rather than favorite, because as I say, it would depend on which day you ask me for that. This book by a Polish author, Henryk Sienkiewicz, called Quo Vadis. And it's about, just very briefly, it's about the sort of clash of Rome and the early church, Christianity, and just how different the values were. And it just is the most remarkable portrait of these colliding worldviews and clashing cultures. And this author, we know that he sort of meticulously researched Rome. Like, for the time that I was reading it, I felt like I was living in Rome, in ancient Rome. So that had a very profound effect on me, because I thought it was a very sort of moving portrait of faith and what it means and how it's different from sort of a worldly way of thinking. So that's maybe an obvious answer for a book. Then actually, no less faith-based for movie. I mean, I think like so many Christians, I'd probably answer the sort of comfort watching for me would nearly be the Lord of the Rings films, because there's everything about those movies sort of speaks of heaven to me. But that's such an obvious one. I have another answer, which is that movie that had another big effect on me was this one called A Hidden Life. Came out back in 2019. And it's about, actually, it's a sort of semi-biopic based on this guy who's actually in the sainthood process with the church, Blessed Franz Jägerstatter, who was a conscientious objector during World War II. He was an Austrian farmer, and when the Nazis came and said, "Okay, you have to fight for us," he refused to do it, and ultimately he was executed for that conscientious objection. But this movie is just the most, and I say sort of semi-biopic because it takes some liberties with his character. I mean, in real life, this guy had absolutely no illusions about what was motivating him, whereas in the movie, he's kind of, he's not really able to articulate why he has this moral objection to Nazism. But it's an absolutely stunning, like it's filmed in it's based in Austria, but it's filmed in the northern Italian Alps. It's just the most beautiful film in terms of like theme, music, setting. So that would definitely be one of my favorites and one of the most profound I've seen.
That's really cool. I'll have to check that out. I've never heard of them actually. But I feel like there's a lot of those stories that aren't told that you hear and you think, why is this not a film or something?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of made for wider consumption. I'd say I'm kind of going to cheat because I don't really have a favorite movie, so I'll just talk about a movie I saw just a couple of days ago, which I've been wanting to watch since before it came out. And the problem is, I don't know if people have heard of this film or if you've heard of this film, Jason, Civil War that came out last year. Have you heard of this?
Oh, yeah, I have. Based in the US.
Yeah. Did you see it at any point?
I did actually. I think if I remember correctly, I am a bit of a movie buff. I absolutely love going to the cinema, and I think I went to the cinema to see that one. Yeah,
I wanted to see it as soon as I saw the trailer last year. And it's like over a year old at this point. But the problem is, and I'm not criticizing her, it takes all sorts to make a world, but my wife is a kind of a high-strung person. Like, she doesn't like too stressful films or anything like that. Like,
mine's the same.
Yeah, she always says, like, there's enough stress in my day-to-day life without having to sit down, like, during my recreation time and deliberately panic myself by watching an intense film. So she wants to watch something cute and cuddly or light.
It doesn't help that you insist on having the volume up at 100 and, like, 4 corners of the room surround sound.
Yeah, and I turn to her and I'll suddenly just, like,
Did you see that?
Yeah, what's that? Like, that kind of way, just to keep her on her toes. No, but so anyway, she didn't want to see it. She said it was too intense for her, judging by the trailer. And as you know, when you're busy, I never have like a couple of hours to myself where I'm just going to sit down and watch a film on my own. If I have free time, I'm going to spend it with my family. So anyway, finally, I got to watch it just a couple of days ago. So I'm coming extremely late to the party. Everybody who's already watching this has probably seen it. But I thought it was unreal. I loved it.
Yeah.
I thought it did a really good job of not portraying itself as biased. Like, this is a really subtle thing, but at one point, one of the characters says, I was there for the Antifa massacre, and I saw the whole thing. And then they move on, and they don't make it clear, is that a load of Antifa who got massacred, or is that a load of Antifa who committed a massacre? And they deliberately leave that ambiguous so that it's sort of like, whichever side of the political spectrum you're on, you can interpret that the way you want. And they don't portray the president as a good guy, and they don't portray the rebels as a good guy. For those who have no idea what I'm talking about, I didn't even explain the film. I'm not going to spoil it because you should watch it. It's great. But the long and short of it is, it's an imagining of what if there was a modern American Civil War where like a load of states tried to secede, as happened in the first American Civil War. And then you had Navy SEALs shooting at Florida National Guard, and there's like an assault on the White House where you've got different states trying to kill each other, and it's trying to give a realistic portrayal. And I heard the director talking about how the point of the film is the dangers of political polarization and what can happen when you become extremely antagonistic to your fellow citizens on grounds. And so it was really ominous. Like, it's not terrifying. It wasn't horrible. I didn't go to bed with nightmares, but it really made me think. We all know a civil war would be a bad thing, but when I was done watching it, it made me realize on a deep level, like, this is the kind of thing that you should pretty much avoid at almost any cost. Like, almost nothing could be worse than this. Like, it just shows you how horrible something like that really would be.
Well, as you were speaking, I was remembering more and more about it. I mean, it was interesting. I think the director said that he purposely chose a really unlikely alliance of states, I think, so as to like remove it from any actual political contact. Like what is something like the Texas California alliance or something like this in the film?
Yeah, you've got like Texas and California have teamed up as like the Western Alliance,
which is like so unlikely in real life. Obviously, like I can't imagine two states less likely to team up.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got like Florida, which is kind of like a swing state, and they broke off as well. But exactly as you say, like I think and I'm agreeing with you. I'm just adding to your point that he knew if he said, "Oh, California secedes," then all the right wingers would go, "Oh, they're the bad guys because I don't like California." Or if Texas secedes, then you'd go, "Oh, they're like the new Confederates, so we hate that." So he deliberately wanted to try and break that and say, "No. The rebels," because there's like a weird. It's I don't want to spend too much talking about this. I know I've been going on a rant.
No, it was a good movie.
It really affected me. The film. I thought it was really good. That the president kind of has an argument, and the rebels kind of have an argument, and neither of them are really good. Where it's like he's into his third term, so he's gone beyond his constitutional limits, and he's using really heavy-handed tactics. So you say, okay, he's a dictator, he's an autocrat, obviously he's the bad guy. But then his argument is sort of, well, we have states seceding from the Union, and they're rebelling, and so for the sake of stability and saving the country long-term, we have to crush those rebellions. And, you know, and you could see a reasonable person supporting either argument, you know? It's sort of like it could go either way. And they're both doing horrible stuff, and both of them are committing atrocities, and it's just nasty, and you're like, this is pretty much how something like this would work out and how it usually goes historically.
I know you don't want to talk about it for too long, but two things, as I say, a lot of this was coming back to me as you were talking. Two things that really stood out for me during this movie. One, I thought the weapon sound in it was phenomenal. I thought like the gunshot, because I saw it in the cinema, I thought the gunshots were it sounded properly. Like you don't really realize how unrealistic guns sound in a lot of movies until, like, I don't know, you watch a movie that has realistic gunshots after, I don't know, having heard them in real life or something. I thought the sound design in the movie was absolutely incredible. Then the other one was, there was that scene that I suppose went most viral after that movie came out, where you've got this one, we won't spoil anything, but this one soldier who, you know, finds these journalists, or he's committing an atrocity out in the middle of nowhere, and they come across him, and he's just utterly unpredictable. And I thought that was a really, really good scene. I thought it was and I know, again, you had people sort of reading into the politics of these things and saying, oh, that's supposed to be a MAGA soldier or something like this, and he's being portrayed in a negative light. But it's like, you know, to be fair to the director, I think that was more to import your own sort of reading of it into the movie. Like, I thought the movie did a pretty good job of setting up its own little, you know, American universe.
Yeah, no, if you're worried, I went into it a little bit worried, thinking, is this going to be a cringe fest where the president is Donald Blump and he, you know, he's dropping nuclear bombs on Mexico or something like that? But they don't. It's not like that. Basically, if that's your concern, I wouldn't worry about it, and I highly recommend it. So you can get it. I'm not gonna tell you where to get it. I don't want to do like free PR for them. They're a massive company. They can sort out their own advertising. But yeah, so
anyway, you can get it from the Gript store.
So with that said, I think that was a real smorgasbord episode. I don't know how I feel about that. We kind of went up and down and everywhere.
But to be fair, our personal lives have both been up and down and everywhere the past couple of weeks. So again, if listeners are somewhat annoyed by our sort of being all over the place in recent weeks, if we've seemed that way, there's been about as good reason for that as there can possibly be.
Yeah, so apologies for the meandering. But with that said, if you want to leave a question that we could answer on the next week's episode, you can go to gript.ie/questions. And if you want to purchase some kind of merchandise, like a mug or a t-shirt or a hoodie, you can go to gript.ie/merch. And if you're viewing, that should be on the screen, the link to that. So with that said, thank you all so much for watching, and God bless. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.